I've been sitting on this for almost a year, only because I really wanted to make sure that I could not find any explanation as to what my husband and I have experienced in our house. So far, neither one of us can. We moved into a new rental home back in September of last year with our two girls and, at the time, no pets. All of this takes place between then and February. The house is a duplex, so we do have a neighbor that we share a wall with. I'd have to say it was about 2 weeks into us living there when I first noticed something odd happening at night. I was in the bedroom, not quite asleep yet, and husband was up on the computer. I started to hear a faint knock inside what I assumed to be our oldest daughter's closet. Two of the bedrooms are on the same side of the house, with the third being a loft above, all of which are against the wall we share with a neighbor. The head of our bed is against that wall, and so is the closet. The closet is in front of the house, while our bedroom is in the back. Assuming it was just our neighbor, I didn't give the noise too much thought until I hear the knock again. This time a bit louder, and it's moved towards me. Sounds like it was coming from a wall in our bathroom. I'm now rolled over on my side to face the bathroom, but with my eyes still closed. The knock happens again, but this time, it's right by my face. I'll never forget it. I actually felt the wall tremble. It startled me, and I shifted all the way to the other side of the bed to wait for it to happen again. No more knocks, and no one else in the house seems to have heard it. So I grumpily blame the neighbor and go back to bed. A few weeks later, I'm lying in bed YouTubing in the dark, kids in bed, and husband is finishing out his night on the computer. I'm on my side facing our bathroom when I see, just above the edge of my phone, a gold sparkle. It looked like a lightning bug had gotten into the house, same sort of flicker and color. I put the phone down and look around in the dark waiting to see it again, but it was not seen again. I thought that it might be the headlights from a car driving by in an alley and go back to YouTube. Later that night, after everyone is in bed, I get startled awake by 3 loud knocks. I open my eyes but remain lying in bed to regain some composure. No one in the house seems to have heard it. No kids calling out, husband doesn't even twitch. Nothing. So now I think I'm dealing with sleep paralysis and got the courage the next morning to ask husband if he's heard any weird noises. He says no, and I don't ask the kids because I don't want to spook them. This happens to me a few more times during the night, always after everyone is asleep, and I've been treating it like sleep paralysis. Until it happened during the day, while I was awake. 7 a.m. Saturday morning. Kids in the living room watching TV, husband is at work. I'm being lazy when knock, knock, knock. I freeze, thinking it might be the front door, but it really doesn't sound like it. Again, kids don't react at all. I jump out of bed, shut the bathroom door, and go into the living room to ask the girls if they heard anything. They did not, and I stay out of the room for the rest of the day. After that, I knew it wasn't sleep paralysis, and I'm trying to talk myself into believing this is either our neighbor or the pipes in the walls, but I can't 100% convince myself of it. Pipes have their own distinct sound. Neighbors' muffled bumps and shuffles clearly sound like they are coming from the other side of the room, not from the same room and directly behind you. Bathroom door gets closed before I go to sleep now. I'm not really sure how much time goes by, but finally, my husband hears it. The knocks happen, but this time, it's on the wall above our heads. I felt him tense and whisper, "You heard it?" He nods, then gets out of bed to check the house. After finding nothing, we go back to sleep. Fast forward to something new. Same setup as usual in our house at night. I'm lying in bed browsing Reddit. Bathroom door open since I'm not yet ready to go to sleep. In the corner of the bathroom, this silver speck starts to glow. It grows, but doesn't keep its brightness. The only way I can describe it is to compare it to dough. The more you stretch it out, the thinner and more transparent it gets. The ball grows until it gets to the size of a basketball, then dissipates. It floated there probably 3 to 4 feet off the ground, and I'm in utter shock, absolutely speechless. Cannot move. What the fuck did I just see? I wait for a few moments to be sure that it won't happen again, shut the bathroom door, and go into the living room to tell husband what I saw. I really don't like to tell him. It creeps him out more than it does me. After the story is finished, he said he saw something similar happen earlier over by the fireplace. We spend a while bouncing ideas off each other as to what could be causing it. Headlights in the alley, flashlight of someone walking down the alley, neighbors' motion sensor lights getting tripped by tree branches, ball lightning, some sort of electrical problem, light source reflecting off the bathroom mirror, and a mirror in the living room? We still have trouble rationalizing it. The last occurrence happened the very first night we welcomed our cat Jack into the family in February. I'm lying in bed, and Jack comes running around the corner into the bathroom. Above him, on the wall, a small shadow darts in as well. Great. I shoo Jack out and shut the door. Part of me full of dread, since I saw the shadow. That means I'm going to be startled awake by the knocks. We have literally had nothing in the house happen since February. No knocks, no sparkles, no glowing silver balls of light. The bathroom door always stays shut, and Jack always sleeps on the bed at our feet. Hi, I'm Jamie Markey.
And I'm Michael Tatum, and this
Is Ghoul Intentions.
nice. Woo.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that
Yes.
story. It was really fun to read.
Your reading of it was great. I had
Thank you.
chills.
It was
Such a
super fun to
splendid
do.
dramatic reading.
Thank you. It was written well by Elizabeth, and she wants to know our take on it, what we think it is. Whatever it is, didn't want to be around Jack. Jack scared it off.
I don't know.
I think it's funny.
It's weird. Sometimes hauntings or whatever can just kind of come and go. Like I had that experience when at the house I lived in for years, like 10 years, and I think every few years something. It was like stuff would just pass through,
Yeah.
but didn't really stick around. So
Right.
we'd have like a few weeks or months of activity and then nothing for years.
Mhm.
So it's not unusual, at least in my experience, to have hauntings that just kind of that are just random and
Right.
localized and then never appear again.
Right. Yeah.
But I have no idea what it could have been.
I know.
Like
So
I
strange.
get
The
you
knocking
though.
and the threes. The knocking and threes.
Yes, and
we
which
talked
is
about
kind of
that.
that's a
That's a
common
thing.
thing. That's a
Mhm.
theme. And the light, the weird globe of light.
Yeah, that goes to the
what a
basketball
crazy-
size, which is very
yeah,
similar to some of the
just
stuff we
very
talked about in
similar. So
Archer.
I don't know.
That is so cool. It was. I mean, I'm glad it's not happening anymore.
Yeah,
But
man, I'd
how
give anything to
disturbing.
know what it was.
And I love though that they tried to come up with other things to explain it away,
Right, rather than just
and
going,
didn't just
it's
settle on it like, oh yeah, it's obviously just a light bouncing off of light, bouncing off a mirror,
clearly
bouncing
it's
off of
Venus.
right, yeah,
It's swamp gas.
it's yeah, it's a weather balloon.
It annoys
Yeah.
annoys me so much when someone who wasn't there is like, let me tell you what you saw.
right. It's like, but
let me mansplain.
yeah. Let me make you rage unnecessarily. How about that? So
you're raging because of hormone slap.
don't give me something to rage about. How about that? How about it?
For being smart, you sure are dumb, mister.
Yeah, right. Oof.
Yeah. So I don't know. I can't think of a time in my life where I've experienced a light. When I've seen lights, it's always been like shimmerings or something like that. I've never seen an orb that I can remember.
Mm-mm.
I'm not really big on belief in orbs and photographs and stuff. I think they just
Yeah,
they
it
don't
has to-
they don't impress me.
It has to be. It don't impress me much.
But if I saw an orb like actually floating, in the bathroom
Yeah.
or something, I'd be like, okay, that's different.
If there's an orb in a picture that like is halfway behind a chair or is casting its own shadow,
Yeah.
then I'm more likely to be like, well,
if it
let's
clearly
double
has a
check it.
depth that.
But otherwise, I'm like, that's a bug, or that room's just real fucking dusty.
Yeah, exactly. It always just looks like dust.
It makes me want to
That's
sneeze.
the camera. There's a great example of, and it was. This is a quick little personal story. There was a surveillance footage from a gas station. This is, God, it must be 15 years ago now. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, but it looks like this blue ghost just kind of
Ooh.
hanging out near one of the gas pumps, and it's very
I know what you're talking about.
vague and shimmering, and it's clearly blue. It's got a blue tint, and it just looks like this vaguely humanoid shaped like cloud that's just kind of darting around over near this pump. And because the surveillance camera's up at an angle, like on one of the eaves of the building. And so it was making all the rounds for like a couple of years. People were like, yeah, this is proof that it's a guy. And I have to admit, when I saw it, I'm like, that's a pretty spooky fucking piece of footage. I have no idea what that could be.
Yeah.
And then someone found like it's a bug on the lens that's just out of focus because it's so close.
It's so close.
And it's blue because it's right under a blue neon sign that's advertising
it was
some
like a
beer
spider
or something
web or
like
something
it.
even.
It was I
seen
think
the
I think it was a
spider web one.
locust. I think it was like a locust or a grasshopper, like just crawling around.
Okay.
But they're so close to the lens that it just looks like a blob.
Yeah.
And it's blue because of the light above it. And you know, if someone didn't think of that like option, you'd immediately think, well, that's got to be, because you know, you see cameras. There's a lot of forced perspective can make you think you see a lot of things that you don't see. Combine that with a pareidolia, whatever. Pareidolia.
No, pareidolia. You say doily. Pareidoilies. That's how you say.
Pareidoilies. Yeah.
That's how Michael told the girls to remember.
It's a pareidoilies.
Pareidoilies. So they know pareidolia, but then we're always like, it's and they're like pareidolia. Like,
yeah, they're correct.
But it's, I mean, it was good for them to learn that, so that if they get scared, and they think they see something, they're like, it's just my mind seeing patterns. It's pareidolia. It's pareidolia. So it's helped them quite a bit, you know, with
but the mind wants to make sense of stuff, and so it'll see something so now ever since that little debunking thing, when I see a piece of footage like that, I always ask myself, okay, can it be something on the lens that's just like a little bug that's so close that it just looks like a blob, and it or dust or something. So it's pretty rare for like all of which is say orbs don't impress me when they're caught on camera, but
don't impress me much.
If I see them in the corner of a room, I'm like, the fuck is that? Yeah. And I haven't had that happen. I haven't seen an orb myself.
No, not in person.
Yeah. But I don't know. I have no idea what that could be. If it was, I'd like to know if it was some kind of electrical problem. What the fuck electrical, like what, how does that work?
How does it stretch out?
If it's ball lightning, how does ball lightning happen in the bathroom? Is that possible? I don't know.
And does it stretch out like dough?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's such a good description too. Oh my God, Elizabeth. It's like the best description. Like,
I don't know.
So
I don't know. It could be a ghost. It could have been some optical illusion that was just, I mean, who fucking knows? But that was fucking weird. And coupled with the knocks, it's pretty compelling that there's more going on there than just like, oh, you're imagining stuff. You're clearly not imagining stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, weird. Good story.
So good.
Story.
So good. So you get to start this week.
I do, because I'm going to finish my thing about H.H. Holmes, which I wanted to do in 2 parts because his story is so fucking complicated.
That H.H. Holmes, he's the worst, I tell you, the worst.
He was a son of a bitch. Like, he was fucking garbage. So I'm not... Okay, so just to remind everyone, my sources for the story come from the book Depraved by Harold Treacher, Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, which is probably one of my favorite true crime books, and the more recently published H.H. Holmes, The True Story of the White City Devil by Adam Seltzer. Also, a lot of the information comes from Last Podcast on the Left. I listen to them. I fucking love them. If you like funny shit that's also really gruesome, because they cover a lot of true crime and a few paranormal stuff, and UFOs and things like that. They're really funny, but they did a really great 3-parter on this a couple of years ago. And so that's where this comes from. And man, they do so much research. I love it, because then I don't have to do anything. So where were we with Holmes? We talked about, how he had come to Chicago and into Inglewood and in a couple of years before the World's Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, different Inglewood.
I can't help it when I hear certain cities. I have to stop them.
Different Inglewood, but
the 90s was very powerful, you guys.
It's so true. The 90s were a strong decade.
Speaking of the 90s, when does this happen again?
This was in the years of the World Fair, around the World Fair. This was late 1800s. This was 1888 to about 1894.
So 1890s.
So this was he was mostly active during the 90s.
Okay.
So yeah, about 100 years before we were coming of age.
I was so active in the 90s. I did so many things. Now it's like I don't want to leave.
So a quick recap: he'd come to Chicago after trying to he'd married this girl named Clara, who he beat mercilessly, and she got away from him and was one of the few women to survive having a relationship with him.
Right.
Then he decided he'd set up shop somewhere, and then accidentally quotes poisoned someone, fled to Philadelphia, or in Philadelphia, fled Philadelphia for Chicago, Inglewood, and decided to like work at a drugstore. Then he bought the drugstore
Hmm.
from the widow of the guy that owned it. He didn't pay her. She complained, sued him. She disappeared.
Hmm.
And then he sold the pharmacy and then started building this building across the street
That also had a
that
pharmacy.
also had a much better pharmacy, a much bigger one, like a proper drugstore with like.
Yes.
So drugstores back in the day, for people that don't know, they were like the equivalent of the modern day department store.
Hmm.
So they were called pharmacies because that's where you went to get specially like concoctions and stuff made. But you could buy jewelry there, clothes, food,
Parfum.
a perfume, all sorts of stuff. So they were really high end, ritzy places.
Hmm.
There are also frequently where you can go to like sit down and get a coffee or a tea or a soda.
Why don't we have those? That sounds amazing.
I know, right? I don't
Right.
know.
Like,
Everyone's gotta like
give me a
fucking
Nordstrom
specialize.
with drugs. Yes, please.
Oh my God, that'd be awesome. So just without the murder, please.
Right.
So
Sans murder.
so he had this pharmacy built on the ground floor of
Mhm.
this building that was 3 stories tall.
The
And
hotel.
the hotel. Well,
Yeah.
it was going to become a hotel. Eventually became a hotel, and then he used this hotel to murder people, including.
And it was the murder mansion, murder castle, murder.
They called it the castle.
The murder castle.
It's called the castle. I don't think he did. I don't believe he called it the castle. It just got that name because it had kind of a gothic look to it. I mean, if you
Okay.
see pictures of it, it doesn't really look like a castle. It just looks like a normal, building for the time period. But opulent for its time. And important to note that he was the only one that knew the whole layout of it because he would hire and fire contractors, like over 500 of them over the course of the several years it took to build this thing, so that he was the only one that knew all the layouts. And this place was like outfitted with a lab slash cellar slash crematory, where he was
It
like,
had a dungeon.
It had a fucking mad scientist laboratory dungeon.
The castle.
The rooms were some of the rooms were airtight, and he had the bank safe that was built into
that he murdered 2 women in at least
2 women who he'd had romance with, and one of them which he'd married. Like he was just an awful guy all around, awful guy. So
the worst.
And this was all kind of. And this wasn't even during the World Fair. The hotel was active. The building itself was active before the World's Fair because everyone was like, "Oh yeah, build now," because when the World Fair comes, it's gonna people are gonna just come. Chicago's gonna be the place,
right?
So, and it already was getting there. So where we left off. So let's talk for a little bit about like this is how much of a supervillain this guy was. So. While he was constructing the castle, Holmes is said to have casually offered a contractor $50 to drop a brick on the head of a man they were looking at from an upper floor that he claimed was his brother-in-law. Now, which brother-in-law? Because he had several, apparently. And the contractor refused and was fired, of course, and told his story to police years later after Holmes was arrested. But whether or not the story is true, it certainly does seem that Holmes was in the market for a henchman at the time. Now, it's not known that he was even talking about any of his actual brother. Mind you, he was a bigamist. He was already married to 2 women because Clara he'd never divorced. He tried to divorce her, and when he tried to sue her, because you had to sue for divorce and you couldn't just file and be like, whatever. It was really hard, and he tried to prove that she was unfaithful, and the judge was like, nope, threw it out. And so he's like, fuck, fuck it. She's off in Colorado or wherever, and so, or Minneapolis, I think. And so I'm just going to marry another. So he married Myrna Belknap, and then killed her, and then whatever. So he was a bigamist, and oh my God, this guy, and he would romance women on the side. I mean, he just couldn't fucking, and he would get bored with them. He'd get bored with them and immediately, and often he'd just be like, well, I'll just kill them. That's the easiest way. There's ghosting, and then there's making people ghosts. Just don't understand. So who he was talking about to the contractor, like, it's not even known if that's actually his brother-in-law. If that was just he wanted to see if this guy would kill someone for him.
Do it.
So it just could be some innocent fucking bystanders just walking around. So who knows?
That some like stupid asshole somewhere is like, well, this is obviously his first wife's fault, because had she given him the divorce, he never would have felt the need to continue to kill the women, his wives, because she made it so difficult for him. So it's obviously her fault.
I know it's always women's fault because women have all the power. Everyone knows that. Even back in even back in the 1880s, 1890s, man, women just ran this country into the ground. Am I right, guys? Right. What fucking whatever. But Holmes is a great example of what happens when you give like bras money. Yeah. Except he didn't pay for anything. He was such a fucking cheat. Like, we'll get to that because that's ultimately what brought him down. He only got caught for murder because he was arrested for fraud. It was
Right.
only because, like,
That's very
the
gangster of him.
authorities got the authorities got interested in his doing in what he was going on, because he owed money to corporations. That's the only reason the
Mm.
Pinkertons got involved. And then once the Pinkertons were involved, that was
Oh.
fucking it for Holmes. But we'll get there. So he was looking for a henchman around this time when the castle was being built. Enter a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Peitzel. Now, Benjamin Peitzel was this tall, kind of attractive looking. If you look pictures of him, like, okay, all right, I'd hit that. But he was alcoholic. He was an alcoholic carpenter who had a wife, several kids, six, I think, and a
Oof.
mile-long rap sheet. I mean, this guy got in trouble with the law for petty larceny and like vagrancy, shit like that all the time. So Holmes hired him and had him around, but he was one of the few contractors he didn't fire. He kept him around and was like, "You're gonna help me do these little side hustles, these little scams." Because I mean, Holmes had so many fucking con games running at once, not just killing women. That was his passion. But his business was just fleecing people from money, from
Right.
out of money. And so Peitzel helped him a lot. So one of the first scams they tried to do together was there was this guy named Leslie Keeley, who was touting this miracle cure for alcoholism, which was this noxious gold-infused drink dubbed the barber pole for its thick red, white, and blue foamy layers. Now, Holmes enrolled the perpetually inebriated Peitzel into Keeley's rehab program for a twofold purpose. One, to sober his associate up, hoping to anyway, and also to steal Keeley's recipe so he could sell it for himself at the
Nice.
pharmacy.
Nice.
And this was very typical of Holmes, who at any given time was juggling at least a dozen plots to game the system. For all his sinister cunning, though, Holmes was every bit as subject to the flummery of his fellow conmen as his own marks were to his. Peitzel returned empty-handed, uncured of his addiction, and none the wiser as to Kelly's ingredients. He did report, however, that in Kelly's employ was a woman of singular beauty, a woman named Emmeline Sagrant. Now, we talked about Emmeline.
Yeah. Sorry.
Emmeline was the woman that died in the safe that left her footprint on there, right? But this is how Benjamin
Right.
Peitzel, yeah, is one of the more tragic because there's no, it's just terrible to think of her like suffocating
She's
in
so
there.
pretty. Put her in a safe and suffocate her.
Well, I mean, Holmes struck up a correspondence with Emmeline, offered her a job as his personal secretary. She was charmed by this because he was very charming and an attractive guy. It was the mustache. The mustache just,
His mustache.
women were like, that mustache. Oh my goodness. I just picture him walking around like underneath his waistcoat, his opulent waistcoat and ascot is like a t-shirt that just says mustache rides free.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, definitely.
women just being like, mustache rides and they're free? How can I say no?
I'm so offended.
So the pair struck up a romance, as we know. When the magic was gone, Holmes grew inevitably bored, as he always did with his women. He made up his mind to kill her. Now, what I didn't talk about last week, because we kind of ended with Emmeline Sagrant, the ruse adopted to get away with it was especially cruel. Holmes proposed to her. When she gleefully accepted, he instructed her to write out a slew of wedding invitations to friends and family, insisting she refer to him in writing as Howard. Now, his excuse was that he was heir to a wealthy British uncle not long for this world, whose fortune would only be paid out to him on condition that Holmes changed his name to Howard. Emmeline didn't see the problem with it and told all her friends that she was getting married to this guy named Howard. Now, he had her write all this out on just like stationery and told her, like, don't worry, we'll send out proper printed invitations as soon as we get a date. But right now, I just want you to write your family and let them know that this is going to happen because they'll be delighted. And they were. Now, after her gruesome demise, which you'll recall left a footprint on the inside of the door to his airtight bank safe, Holmes had official wedding announcements printed up and mailed them to Emmeline's family, elaborating on the Howard ruse by including a different last name. Thus, he could wave off suspicion by simply pointing out that he wasn't the man she'd been referring to. Emmeline's family assumed she'd simply died on honeymoon in Europe with whoever this Howard guy was. Tragic,
Wow.
but such were the times. They were like, that
Yeah.
sucks, but they didn't have the money to try to go find her.
Right.
Now, from May 1st to October 30th, 1893, the World's Fair drew over 27 million people. most of them out-of-towners. Now, men in search of lodgings were frequently turned away from the castle, whereas there was always vacancies for the women folk. We'll never know how many met their doom inside Holmes' satanic funhouse, but at the World's Fair, at the height of the World's Fair, his reign of terror in Chicago was actually drawing to a close. His side hustles were becoming increasingly transparent. Holmes was running so many confidence games at once, he was losing track and losing his edge. Creditors, to whom he owed substantial amounts of money, remember, he seldom paid for anything. You remember the safe, where he bought the safe from the bank, from the manufacturer, rather, and never paid for it, but had it built into his wall. And when they came to claim it, they were like, he's like, if you remove it, I'm going to sue you for damages. And they were like, fuck, it would cost more. So they just let him have it and like, fuck this guy. But these people, these companies started comparing notes and being like, oh, this Holmes guy? Yeah, is he fucking you over too? And so they started they consolidated and they were starting to close the net. And Holmes began feeling the heat. Now, before leaving town altogether, Holmes couldn't resist giving matrimonial homicide another whirl. Minnie Williams was a failed actress from Boston and heir, along with her sister Nanny, to a sizable Texas oil fortune worth about $3.5 million by modern day reckoning.
Oh, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
I mean, such as Texas and oil.
Yeah, especially then.
Yeah.
Now, by all accounts, the homeliest of Holmes's ill-fated conquests, Minnie was also not the sharpest tool in the shed. Clearly, Nanny was the brains of the Williams sisters' outfit. Now, Holmes's ego wasn't quite blown up enough to make him think he had a shot at the Williams fortune, but Minnie did own a valuable plot of land in Fort Worth, Texas, where Holmes set his sights on building another murder castle, only on a much grander scale. Now, he courted Minnie chiefly by appealing to the headstrong and protective Nanny, who knew all too well her sister's propensity for being taken in by good-looking men. Ever the debonair gentleman, Holmes charmed the Williams sisters on nightly strolls through the World's Fair grounds for a week, before at last dispatching them one after the other in his bank safe, though not before securing the deed to the property in Fort Worth.
Wow.
The weird detail, Holmes gifted their clothing to Benjamin Peitzel's wife, Carrie.
Wow.
Claiming that the boon came from a cousin who'd had to jettison her belongings because she was skipping town. And, Carrie was like, thanks. I don't know that Carrie ever really liked Holmes, but he took care of the Peitzels because Benjamin was such a fuck up.
Right.
And so we'll see that constantly she was kind of reluctantly in on these schemes because she didn't know that he was a murderer. She just thought he was a con man. And she was like, well, I mean, Peitzel's so in trouble with the law anyway, like what chances he got, whatever. So I think she was kind of and they also fucking 6 kids.
Right.
So she's too fucking busy and just like, please, okay, just keep him out of trouble. So, in 1893, shortly before leaving Chicago, Holmes hatched an insurance scheme echoing his days in medical school. Now, remember, he had this scheme where they would steal cadavers. He and a buddy would take out insurance policies on each other, find a cadaver,
pretend it was
them, make the money, whatever. Now, the plan in this case was to take out a $10,000 life insurance policy on Benjamin Peitzel, pay off the premiums long enough for the policy to appear above board, locate a cadaver, stage a phony death that would leave the body so disfigured identification would be impossible, claim it was Peitzel, then split the proceeds. The scheme required time to come off properly while they let it mature into what promised to be a glorious payout worth about $250K today.
Wow.
The two men went about their usual, slew of side hustles. Peitzel, alas, drunk and disorderly as he was, could seldom keep track of when the premiums were due, let alone scrape up the money to pay them. Holmes sent him the needed funds, but Peitzel would invariably blow it on booze. More than once, Holmes had to rush in at the 11th hour and make a payment minutes before the policy would be rendered null and void. This happened enough times that this detail would come back to haunt him when he was finally arrested. Because they're like, why the fuck were you paying for this guy's insurance, whatever? And all these little things he had to do to maintain these hustles eventually all came together, but it took forever. His loyal henchmen...
the people that agreed to do it were not reliable with it human beings.
Well, and I suppose Holmes thought, well, that's the best person to involve because who's going to believe them? Because they're fuck ups, they're drunks, they're criminals, whatever.
But then they're also fuck ups.
Yeah, exactly. So it's,
not everyone is
the devil's in the details.
Sociopath.
Now, the point being that his loyal henchman was becoming a liability. Now, Holmes and Peitzel moved down to Texas for a spell after leaving Chicago to avoid creditors, along with Holmes's latest wife, a woman named Georgiana Yoke, who he married in where did he marry her? Hang on, let me look that up real quick because I had it written down and not in here. Denver. They met in Denver. Fuck, he got around. Like the amount of travel that was possible at the time by train, if you had any
Yeah.
money, it was insanely, so he met her, married her, and this was like, she would survive him though. She was one of the only other women that would survive, because this was right at the end of his reign. And he
Right.
was traveling so much to avoid authorities that she wasn't around as much. He would leave her in places and come back and collect her weeks later. It was, yeah, it's fucking crazy. Um, so well out of striking distance of Chicago debt collectors, Holmes began construction on his Fort Worth murder castle at the corner of Commerce and 2nd Street,
What?
exactly as he'd done in Inglewood.
Commerce and 2nd Street?
Mhm.
Isn't that like, that's like right in the middle?
That's right there. It's like basically Sundance Square. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sunday, which is
yeah,
wicked fucking haunted, but also
yeah.
lovely.
Imagine how much more haunted it
I
would
know.
be.
In the daytime though, it is lovely.
It's a
It's
gorgeous
such a pretty
place. I
little
love
area.
downtown Fort Worth.
It's so
It's
nice.
very Texas too. Like, I
Yeah.
love Dallas, but Dallas doesn't really feel Texas to me. I
It
mean,
just feels like
it just
city.
feels like a really cool city, and there's a
Yeah.
lot to do, but there's nothing really about it that speaks Texas. But Fort Worth, fucking
yeah.
cowtown. But it's like it's a metropolitan cowtown. It's hard to
It's very
describe.
artistic though as well.
Yeah.
It's like the artsy kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah, artsy, but it's kind of art meets killing cattle. So they were so he starts building this castle, or making plans to build right on Commerce and 2nd Street, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from here, and doing the same thing, like collecting, buying shit on credit and then never paying it. So that didn't fly in Texas though, and he might have gotten away with it. But he and Pitzel, and this is the thing: psychopaths get bored. They get bored with their romance. They get bored with their friends. They
And
get
that's
bored
why
with
they
their
end up
associates.
being addicts. They usually are
Mhm.
addicts, addicted to something. He obviously is addicted to murder and mayhem, but
Well, he's addicted to the thrill of committing
thrill,
crimes and getting
yes.
away with it.
So that's why you'll find a lot of sociopaths are alcoholics, drug addicts,
Uh-huh.
sex addicts,
Yes.
things like that,
Yes.
because they'll do anything for something to be exciting.
Because they don't, I guess the thinking is they don't feel fear the way most people do.
They don't feel emotions.
They don't feel emotion generally. So yeah, it's very strange. So he and Peitzel, like, just for the sheer thrill of it, decided to try their hand at horse thieving in Texas,
That's not
where it's a capital offense.
right. That's not a good idea.
And they got caught.
It's like, why don't you try stealing guns from personal homes in Texas?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
terrible.
why don't you try stealing a police car from a policeman?
Right.
It's just, what the
Right,
fuck?
while he's in it.
While he's in it with his partner and their
their
dog.
guns.
But that was the kind of shit that Holmes and Peitzel were like, let's try. It's fine. Let's just do it. It's like, we're in Texas.
Right.
Let's do the one.
Because the
let's
outcome
do the
doesn't
crime.
matter. The outcome
It
doesn't matter.
They
It's
want to
about
get away
the
with it.
thrill.
And so
Yeah.
before they could be arrested though, they had to skip town.
Right.
So there goes his plans to fucking build this castle. So all he could do.
Well, thank God for that. Stupid
Yeah.
ideas got him out of Texas.
So they were caught red-handed in their first attempt at horse thievery, and wound up having to make a beeline for St. Louis, Missouri. Now, the dapper criminal didn't fare much better. There, authorities saw right through his usual trick of buying pharmaceuticals.
Well, there it went. All right.
Let me start that sentence again.
Sure.
Authorities saw right through his usual trick of buying pharmaceuticals on credit and reselling them under an assumed name. And of course, when people would come to collect, he'd be like, "I didn't buy that. That was H.H. Holmes or whatever."
That was J.J. Holmes.
But I
Totally
guess
different.
in St. Louis, they were like, "Nah, fuck you, dude." So they threw him in prison for a little while. He got arrested for the first time in his career as a criminal.
Really?
And by now he's like 33, 34.
Mhm.
And this is the first time he's ever been fucking arrested. So he is like, woo! They throw him in a cell with a guy named Marion Hedgepeth, who's the notorious handsome bandit. He was one of the last like great outlaws
Right.
of the Old West, like for the sort of dying Old West. So Holmes was fascinated by this guy, knew all about him, and was like, "Oh, you're kind of a celebrity in our chosen field of outlawlessness or whatever of criminality, whatever. And you're a fellow badass." And so he was like kind of telling Marion about this. So he thought he seemed to really want to impress this outlaw. But the two men couldn't have been more opposite in temperament. Like Holmes was very dapper and he was The guys on last podcast on the left compare Holmes to like the Penguin. Because he's got like all these gadgets and he's got the dapper look and he's very well spoken and you know, he's like an attractive penguin, I guess. But Hedgepeth was like Billy the Kid. Like he was a fucking
He was a
gun-toting,
bad
train-robbing.
boy.
He wound up getting shot and killed at a trying to hold up a gas station in 1909. Like
Oh,
that's an old gas station.
yeah.
Like that was sounds like it was one of the first, and he was like,
Right.
"I'm gonna hold it up."
Yeah. See how this goes. It's new.
It's a new business.
Okay, that's different. Let's
So
do
he's
it.
trying. But he was really famous, and of
Mhm.
course, no one knows how good a criminal Holmes is because he's gotten away with it for so long that
Right.
he's, you know, I imagine he's sitting in the cell with this guy, the handsome bandit, going, you know, people, you know, he needed to impress him. So he told him about this insurance scheme he'd been cooking up involving Benjamin Peitzel,
Mhm.
and that they were letting the policy mature. And he was like, I will let you in on it to the tune of $500 if you can put me in touch with a local lawyer here
Mhm.
that would be willing to kind of be our fence to broker the deal. He
Right.
needs to be corrupt. So clearly anyone you know that you can. So Marion was like, all right, sounds good. I could use 500 when I get out of here.
Right.
So, he led Hedgepeth. Let's see, we got 500. Was promised $500 for putting him in touch with this lawyer. This lawyer's name was Jethpa Howe. The fucking names on these people, Jethpa. There's a name I want to
Jethpa.
combat. Jethpa, Geptha. Now Jethpa was
Jethpa.
real enthusiastic. He was like, the cadaver angle is fucking brilliant. I'm all in. He's
I
like,
love
who
it.
would they love? It's perfect. That gets foolproof. And so, now,
It didn't work for you before, but
so he was
it's
in a-
surely
so-
going to work now.
so once Holmes made bail, and he did pretty quickly, you know, this Jethpa Howe guy, like bent over backwards to take part in it. He was like, let's do it. And he would later back out because he was like, no, the authorities are sniffing around. Fuck that. No, bye.
Now it's getting weird. So
Now remember, the scheme was for, well, I'll get to that. Okay, so Peitzel had meanwhile moved his wife and children to St. Louis with them while waiting for the insurance scam to mature. Now, Holmes set him up as a patent clerk / kind of amateur inventor. The plan was to arrange an explosion in Peitzel's workplace in St. Louis or wherever, while Peitzel was secretly out of the country and a fresh cadaver was in his place where the explosion was to be. Now, before setting out to catch his boat overseas, Peitzel told his children not to believe reports of his death. His wife, Carrie, of course, was in on the whole scam and coached the children to play along when the day came. Of course, they didn't have a day set. They didn't know. It could be weeks, could be months. It just depended on, you know, when they could get all the shit together to make this look right. 2 months after leaving St. Louis, a body burned beyond all recognition and reported to be Peitzel's turned up in a rented patent office in Philadelphia. The bedraggled would-be inventor, who'd been tantalizing neighbors with talk of a new self-propelled saw he was in the process of perfecting, had apparently lit his pipe too close to a vat of volatile chemicals. Despite his last words to them, Benjamin Peitzel's children actually thought he was dead. He was drunk, after all, prone to saying all kinds of crazy shit all the time. The command to ignore reports of his demise was, they assumed, just one more cockamamie off-the-cuff remark in a long line of booze-fueled bullshit. His wife, Carrie, however, took comfort knowing her man was across the ocean, living it up in London, but let the children mourn, thinking that it would help sell the scam to insurance adjusters if people started asking questions. So she just kind of like, I'll just let them. And when they reunite with them in a few months' time, when we catch a boat to wherever, the idea was for him to come back into Canada, and they would meet him there. And then she'd be like, surprise, kids! Like, that doesn't fuck your kids up at all. The only problem was that the kids were right. It was Peitzel's body. Tired of Peitzel's drunkenness and worried that the faithful henchman would blab to the wrong person about their many misdeeds, Holmes forewent the cadaver and simply cut out the middleman by using Peitzel himself, knocking him out with chloroform and staging the explosion around his unconscious body. The next day,
I wouldn't be surprised, though, if it was just like it actually happened that way and he accidentally killed himself. You know what I mean? The way
Holmes had some things to say about it when it came to light.
Right.
We're not done.
Okay,
don't worry.
right.
This was the beginning of his undoing.
Okay.
Also the beginning of his worst crime spree as a murderer. Like the next day,
it's not even.
It gets
bad
worse.
Yet.
Like the murder castle is just the icing on the cake.
Okay.
It's what he's most known for. But like what he's gonna do in the next few months is so much before he's finally caught is awful. So the next day after the body was found, Holmes caught a train to St. Louis where he collected Peitzel's oldest daughter, Alice, and brought her back to Philadelphia to identify her father's body. Now, in his mind, and he convinced the family of this, Alice was more optimal than Carrie, the wife, because Alice thought her father was actually dead, so her reaction would
Right.
read better. So, I mean, he was an actor, as we thought about. Now, so naturally, there was more to it than that. With Peitzel really dead, there was no point giving his brood a cut. In
Hmm.
fact, that had never been the intention. Carting the eldest
What?
daughter to Philadelphia was just the first stage of a long, drawn-out process whereby Holmes intended to make a clean break and murder his deceased colleague's entire family.
Shit. That's so 7 more people.
7 more people,
Okay.
children,
Yeah.
and a wife and children. After Alice positively ID'd Peitzel's body, Holmes went back to St. Louis, left Alice in Philadelphia, and warned the widow Carrie that suspicious insurance adjusters were beginning to ask questions. What needed to be done for safety's sake, he said, was for him to take 2 more kids off her hands. Very simple. He's like, because if they come around, they're looking for a family of like, they're looking for 6 kids. So
Hmm.
if you've only got 3 or 2, whatever, then who are you? They don't, whatever. He's like, so give the kids to me. I'll take them on a trip, and we're all eventually going to meet up in Toronto. I'm arranging for Benjamin to help a boat from London where he's been laying low. He's going to come back, and we're all going to meet up in Toronto together. But I'm going to kind of take you. So he got these 2. He got 3 more of the children. 2 more of the children. So with Alice, and then 2 of the other children, he had 3 with him, and then he
Right.
would come back and get her and send her on a certain way. And like he was juggling this all this trip to the Midwest and upper parts of Canada for months, basically to throw people off the trail while he
Yeah.
was getting them separated slowly and surely.
Hmm.
And it was so for the next a few months, Holmes schlepped Howard, the youngest, Nellie, and Alice, the 3 children, across the Midwest, checking into hotels under assumed names, sometimes claiming to be their father, sometimes claiming to be their uncle, always giving hotel staff a different story, not because he couldn't keep things straight, but to breed confusion and obscure their trail. Now, one thing that did give him away is he always was dressed to the nines because he
Yeah.
was H.H. Holmes. He's like, motherfucking
The
H.H. Holmes.
narcissist in him
Yeah,
couldn't.
but the
Yeah.
kids look like shit. The kids look like, the kids were dirty. Their clothes were threadbare. I mean, they were a poor family, and he made no effort to,
Right.
help them. In fact, at one point, when the weather started turning a little cold and they needed coats, he was like, I could buy you coats, or I could just kill you. Like it
Oh.
literally got to that point. So, and now at the same time that he was moving all this around, he was moving back and forth, escorting Carrie, the wife, Carrie Peitzel's
Right.
widow, into Toronto, and kind of in this roundabout way, where he said he arranged for her and the kids to reunite with each other and with Peitzel. At one point, he had Carrie staying at a hotel in Detroit, mere blocks from where he was keeping the children, completely unbeknownst to her. Also, completely unbeknownst to his other wife, Georgiana, who was staying in a hotel just a few blocks from there.
Oh my God.
This is how much he was doing. So, like, because he was keeping up appearances with his latest wife, whom he had believing they were on a kind of staggered honeymoon. Like, okay, we're gonna go. He's like, the end goal is I'm gonna take you to Niagara Falls, but
Uh-huh.
in the
And then I'm
process,
gonna
but
push
I
you
have to,
over
do.
Niagara
He probably would
Falls.
have, right? If he'd made it, he would have
Yeah.
probably. But he told Georgiana, like, we're gonna go to Niagara Falls, but in the meanwhile, let's take a kind of scenic route because I have this business I'm running called ABC Copier. It's supposed to be like the first copy machine, which I imagine was like I can't even imagine. It's like it's really just filled with knives.
Right.
Um, it's a murder machine. He's like, it copies it out. Oh, the reds come out so well.
Right. It copies
Um,
murder.
but so he told his wife Georgiana, he's like, cool. So what I'll do is I'll leave you and with some money to go tour around these cities for a day or two while I go and do business, and then
Hmm.
we'll hang out, we'll do dinner or whatever, and then so he would take her to a nice hotel, wine and dine her, leave her alone for a day or two, be like, okay, I've got to go away on business. I'll come back and get you on Tuesday, and then we'll go to the next city en route to Niagara Falls. And what he was really doing was going. Then he'd go over to Carrie and be like, cool, I got your tickets to whatever. I've arranged your hotel in the next city. We'll go there, and cool. And then he'd go check on the kids that were like, where is mom? We'll write her a letter. Write mom a letter. I'll be sure to give it to her. She's gonna meet you in Toronto. It's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
It's gonna be fine.
And you
Uncle
think,
Holmes has got you.
right. And you think normal people would be so flustered trying to keep it all straight. But for him, it was
It
probably
was
thrilling. It was
yes,
very exciting. It kept him
yes. It's like
entertained.
for
It was
him,
all
this was a
entertainment.
comedy.
Yeah.
This was thrilling because he didn't have to do it this way.
No.
He
It
just
seems
thought
absurd, but it's about the excitement.
exactly,
Yeah.
and so he had all
So
these fucking plates spinning, and it was just fucking ridiculous. Now, the Peitzel children spent their days locked in hotel rooms, writing letters to Carrie and wondering why their mom wouldn't write back. Holmes, of course, never mailed their correspondences. As the weather
or
turned
handed them
cold,
directly to her.
ever, yeah. And as the weather turned cold, Holmes kind of scoffed at the idea of buying the three ragamuffins winter clothing and decided it was time to be rid of them. Because
Jeez.
the trail was cold enough, literally that he could just be like, no one's going to care. Howard, the little boy, was the first to go on the pretext of taking him to live with cousin Nanny, who of course was dead. Holmes separated him from his sisters, rented a secluded house in a seedy part of town, suffocated the boy with chloroform, and dismembered his body with surgical instruments purchased for the occasion. Holmes then burned the remains in a stove. All that was left of little Howard were some teeth and fragments of bone.
Oh my God.
In Toronto, Holmes stuffed Alice and Nellie into a steamer trunk outfitted with a hole through which he could run a tube connected to the gas jets. Once the girls were suffocated, he carted them via the trunk to another secluded rental house and buried them in the cellar, brazenly borrowing a neighbor's shovel to do it with, saying he's like, I'm going to bury some potatoes. And the neighbor was like, sure, okay.
Yeah.
And whatever. And later, when their bodies were found, because little Nellie had a club foot that was an identifying mark, Holmes amputated her feet at the ankles to thwart identification.
Wow.
So well on his way to wiping out the whole Peitzel family, Holmes was ultimately undone by the man he tried so hard to impress back in St. Louis, Marion Hedgepeth, a.k.a. the Handsome Bandit. The hardened outlaw was miffed at the $500 cut he never received for his role in the insurance scam and ratted Holmes out as part of a plea bargain. See, while sitting in his cell one day, he'd read in the papers about Peitzel's death in Philadelphia, put two and two together, and was like, that motherfucker. I never got $500 for putting him in touch with the lawyer that was going to help him out with this fucking scheme. Hey, guard, come here. And he started telling the guard. The guard told the authorities that he came before a judge, and as part of a plea deal, he ratted out Holmes, but for insurance. Well, so then Holmes's name and all these other things, all these creditors from St. Louis and from fucking Chicago and from Fort Worth were like, that motherfucker. So then the Pinkertons were called in.
Right.
And this was a time when the Pinkertons were the only real detective agency that had the network of informants and officers that they did. So they could cross state lines. They could go anywhere, do anything. They were fucking terrifying if you were a criminal. The last people you wanted on your trail was the Pinkertons because they always fucking got you.
Yeah. Like,
they were just so incredibly
what's
organized.
That great TV show, with the, oh gosh, I'm gonna sit here and think and be like, oh, the one with the bit and the butt and the butt. So it's, God, you can just edit my thinking.
It's gonna come to you in the night.
Oh, it's the one with the woman and she's a little crazy and Frankenstein and like all the different Penny Dreadful. Penny Dreadful. It's like Penny Dreadful. The Pinkertons are in Penny Dreadful, and like they were terrifying. It was like they were almost the bad guys. That's how scary.
I mean, they were so like there's the stuff of I could do a whole episode about them. Yeah, and I might one day, even though it's
they're basically for a fee, they'll find whoever you want. Yeah. It didn't have to be law enforcement. It was, if you pay the right price, they'll bring you whomever you want. Yeah. They were
the original, the original private eyes. In fact, the word private eye came from their lexicon because they considered themselves, the organization referred to themselves as the all-seeing eye.
Right.
So the insurance company hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to track Holmes down. A detective named Frank Geyer tirelessly followed the mastermind's complex trail for over 6 months, seeing past the deception and the false leads. Finally, on November 17th, 1894, H.H. Holmes was arrested in Boston on charges of insurance fraud. Once in custody, his schemes unraveled one by one until at last the worst of them came to light and authorities launched a proper murder investigation. They went back to the castle and they found all this evidence. They found the safe with the acid footprint on the inside of it. They found bones in the cellar, then the dungeon and all this other shit. And they were like, okay, clearly some people met their end here. When Carrie Peitzel visited Holmes in prison, he maintained his innocence, declaiming loudly that the body in the patent office wasn't her husband, but a cadaver as originally planned, and that Benjamin, along with the kids, were alive and well out of the country. When, however, the bodies of Alice and Nellie and Howard, or at least what was left of Howard, were found,
Mm,
um,
poor Carrie.
all of them, like all poor fucking all of them. Holmes like backpedaled and was like, "Okay, they're dead, but I didn't do it. Minnie did it." Remember the failed actress from Boston?
Right.
And
The
so
dead one.
the dead one that he
Yeah.
killed, and so he tried to blame Minnie on it, saying like, "Yeah, they died in her care. Like I gave them to Minnie and Nanny, and I guess they killed them. That's what's happened." And then they found their remains, and so the
Yeah.
police were like, "Okay, they're we have to kind of eliminate them as suspects."
Right. So who killed them? And we'll go find their bodies.
Right,
And then who
and so
killed
he
them?
played,
And we'll go
and he
find.
sort of played this thing. It was like, "Oh, it must have been so and so." We're like, "Well, they're dead too." So he kept
Yeah.
just like it was like playing Clue.
Yeah. Jeez.
So when his
But
story
the
fell
answer
apart,
was always H.H. Holmes.
right, always,
And
well,
wherever it
or
is with the
Mudgett,
whatever.
that's his real
Right.
name.
Yeah, Mudgett.
If you'll recall. So when the story fell apart, authorities finally took a closer look at the now abandoned castle in Englewood. The evidence there sealed his fate. While only convicted for 4 murders officially, he confessed to 27.
Wow.
At one time as many as 30, but 27 was the most consistent number. He penned a memoir maintaining his innocence before the Peitzel children were found. Once that cat was out of the bag, however, he fessed up and insisted he'd been possessed by the devil, saying, quote, "I was born with a devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing. I was born with the evil one standing as my sponsor beside the bed where I was ushered into the world, and he has been with me since." Now, this is where his story gets like questionable, because he started saying like, "Oh, I've killed hundreds of people, whatever." But this was the age of what they call yellow journalism, where everything was tabloid and exaggerated. It was like, "Oh, just
unlike now,
totally different than now."
Yeah, right.
And it's the age of so there is some, and especially with a more recent book written by Adam Seltzer, H.H. Holmes, the true story of the White City Devil, there is some evidence to suggest that like his killing of the Peitzel children and of the women that he married or loved and then murdered, what if that happened, but the extent to which the murder castle was a murder castle and not just the location where he happened to kill a couple of women that he was trying to get rid of for whatever fucking crazy reasons, like there's some evidence to suggest that all that story was blown out of proportion, that the murder castle was not a fucking factory of murder, that he killed only 3 or 4 people there.
Only 3.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's still a fucking evil son of a bitch who did these things, but, it's probably he only killed, like, maybe 9 people, I think, is the final count. That's total. Most of them women that he had romanced and then gotten bored with, and then, of course, the Peitzel children, because he was like, they're a liability.
Right.
And that book is really interesting. It kind of goes into, this is the Adam Seltzer book, goes into a lot of detail about how the Holmes story emerged as the legend it became. And he's like, there is a lot of truth to it, but it's so hard to separate fact from fiction, because so much of what we know of the story came from Holmes himself once he decided, well, I kind of like playing the role of the villain. Now that everyone thinks I'm this bad guy, I might as well just fucking give him a bad guy.
Yeah.
And so he starts saying, yeah, I murdered people in that castle and whatever.
Became thrilling. He's got to make it thrilling.
But before he started doing that, there's somewhere, it's like before that, he said he was innocent, and he was like, no, I didn't do it. Then he's like, well, okay, I did that, but I only killed a couple of people. All these other people you're saying I killed, those are the bones in the cellar that you found were like just there because I stole bodies, and I was, from the morgue, and I was going to sell them to medical supply companies. That's what I do. That was part of my scam, and that's illegal, but I didn't murder those bodies. And then police would be like, but you murdered these other people, so why would you go to the trouble of digging up a grave and you just murder people, especially right here? And then he would say, well, what about all these secret panels and hallways and stuff like that? And he would be like, that's just where I hid stuff from creditors that would come looking for shit. And there is some validity to that, because when they looked at the castle, they did find a lot of fucking stuff that he bought and never paid for, hiding in secret panels, and that may have been part of the murder castle. But knowing how many plates Holmes was capable of spinning, there's no reason to assume he wouldn't look at the expense of building a murder castle and be like, well, it can't just be for murder. Let me do it for let it just be an empire, a little the empire seat of crime.
Yeah.
Either way, his trial was sensational and whatever. He was convicted and did a stint in prison for a couple of years before he was finally hanged.
Thank you.
On May 7th, 1896. Interestingly enough,
1896.
his neck didn't snap the way it did. Mostly, he strangled to death slowly over 15 minutes.
That was done on purpose. You can't tell me that wasn't.
May have been.
The people who were in charge of
He
the hangings
was hated.
the people who were in charge of hangings were hired because they knew the science behind the neck snap and making sure that person.
And this was a technology that had been used for hundreds of years.
If somebody, especially somebody that high profile, it wouldn't have been like a first timer. Whoever did it on purpose.
Yeah.
And was probably paid very well to do it.
I hope they were. Because there's some justice in this guy that killed these children and suffocated them and all that. Like, there's some justice in him meeting a similar fate. If only he could have experienced it 9 times.
In my movie, are you ready?
I'm so ready.
The hanging happens, but as it's happening, he sees all of the spirits of the people he's killed, and they all come up and hold him up when the door drops and slowly let him down so that the neck snapping won't happen. And then they just watch him as he...
I bet he died with a boner.
Gross.
Just the kind. That's just
so exciting. It's so exciting.
This is the kind of fucking creep he was.
Yeah, for real.
So yeah, he died on May 7th, 1896.
I bet he died with a boner.
An unknown arson burned a large part of the castle in 1895. A post office now stands on the old spot. Ghost tours of the basement are available and regularly given by appointment. Some people do claim to see things there, but there's nothing terribly substantial. There's nothing it's all just kind of stories of people going, yeah, we were there and I felt chill and whatever. I'm like, yeah,
I'm sure the energy is very fucked up there.
Yeah. But one last detail that I thought was gruesome and a good way to end the story was during their investigation, police interviewed the castle groundskeeper, a man named Quinlan. When asked about the goings-on in the Inglewood House of Horrors during his tenure, the man told them that his dapper employer simply forbade him from ever cleaning the 3rd floor, that he knew nothing. Years after Holmes's conviction and execution, Quinlan committed suicide by drinking strychnine. The note he left was only one line, quote, "I couldn't sleep."
Whoa.
And that
it's creepy.
Is the story of H.H. Holmes.
Very well done.
Mr. Mudgett, the son of a bitch who made a lot of ghosts.
Yeah. Great story. Man. Ooh,
I highly recommend you guys check out those books I mentioned and the last podcast on the left. They're just awesome anyway. Like, they're really loud and funny. But so if you like loud and funny and gruesome, check them out. They're flawless.
Yeah, they are great. Yeah. They're great. Well, my story is also a crime story.
Yes.
But before we do that, I need another beverage.
Yes.
And also to pee.
Yes.
All right. Are you ready?
I'm so ready. I'm just so glad to get H.H. Holmes off my chest. I now want to hear about someone else's disaster, tragedy, crime, whatever.
Right. Okay. So this is a story of the Greenbriar ghost.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, of course, Wikipedia, thank you. Hollowhill.com, Prairie Ghosts, was always good. Writings by Katie Letcher-Lyle and murderbygaslight.com, which is a good crime one.
Murder by Gaslight. Oh, I have to check that out.
Elva Zona Heister was known as Zoni in some accounts, but we're going to stick with Zona because I prefer Zona.
I like Zona.
I'm the one telling the story. So
I'm sure she would appreciate being
I had
called
originally
Zona.
done it as Zoni. It just doesn't, I don't know,
It
feel
is
right.
to modern ears, Zoni just sounds weird.
Like, why would you do Zoni instead of Zona? It doesn't make it any shorter.
Yeah, Zoni.
So
May have been a dialect thing too.
It could have been. Because this is an Appalachian story.
Zona.
Yes. Okay. So Zona was born in Greenbriar County, West Virginia, probably in 1873. The census had her listed as 7 years old in 1880. So that's the general accepted year. However, and spoiler alert, she does die.
You mean she's not still around?
She's not.
I do know this story, actually.
Right.
I know of it. Yeah.
Her obituary and tombstone have her birth year listed as 1876. But it's generally accepted that she was born in 1873. But years and stuff is they just weren't as specific back then.
So they weren't. I mean, there was no point to be
right
then.
So, thanks to this kind of record keeping, there's not much information available about her early life, but we do know that she was raised near Richlands, West Virginia, was one of 9 children, and
Oof.
she was considered one of the most beautiful women in the county. She
Mhm.
was she was very popular, very well liked in the county. People knew who she was. And her first boyfriend was a man named Albert Carr, who later married twice and named his 2 daughters Elva and Zora. So
Oh.
he apparently still had her on his heart. So
Oh.
sad. And sweet, I guess. So on November 29th, 1895, Zona gave birth to a little boy. The father was George Waldridge. Ancestry.com has them listed as married, but that may or may not be accurate. George was an unskilled laborer, and the child is listed as infant boy Heister, not Waldridge. So it's hard to know what the truth
Mm.
is behind that particular story. She may have had the child out of wedlock, but the family told people she'd been married to save face. And
Yeah.
so in some stories, it says she was married to him, um, and some it doesn't. And there's really no trace of him afterwards. So, either way, in 1896, Zona met a man named Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe. Isn't
Trout
it?
shoe just
Trout
sounds
Shoe.
like a
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss book.
He was known as Edward and Trout. He
Mm.
told them his name was Edward, um, nickname was Trout, but we're just going to call him Shoe because why not? He was, because
Also, fuck him. I know where the story's
I'm
going.
telling the story.
Sorry, I'm just.
We're not going to use his first name because, yeah. He was 12 years her senior. Shu had just moved to Greenbriar County in search of a new life working as a blacksmith. After meeting not long after his arrival, Zona and Shu married within weeks, despite objection to the match by Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heister, who by some accounts was uneasy about the match. Other accounts say Mary had taken an instant dislike to Shu, but the two were desperately in love. So on October 20th of the same year, they got hitched and began their new life together. One wonders if she indeed had given birth out of wedlock, with the prospect of getting married to a virtual stranger with a job was
Mm.
preferred to never getting married at all. However, he was known as a very handsome, charismatic, dashing man.
Mm.
So most likely she completely fell for him.
Right. And he's a
Yeah.
blacksmith. That's
Yeah.
just hot. That's just
Yes.
hot.
And that's a picture of them, which I'll put on the Instagram.
He's I
He was a
mean,
good looking
again,
dude. He was a good looking dude.
I'd hit it.
Yeah. 3 months later, on January 23rd, 1897, Shu sent Andy Jones, an 11-year-old neighbor boy who did chores for Zona, to their log house on an errand. Andy found Zona's lifeless body lying at the foot of the stairs, stretched out with her feet together and one hand on her stomach. The boy ran to tell his mother and then went to the blacksmith shop to tell Shu what had happened. Shu appeared naturally devastated and headed to his house immediately. Either Andy's mother or Shu summoned the local doctor and coroner, George W. Knapp, who took about an hour to arrive.
Mm.
By the time Knapp had gotten there, Shu had carried his wife's body upstairs to the bedroom, changed her clothes, and laid her out on the bed. He prepared her body for burial, placing a brightly colored scarf around her neck that he said was her favorite.
Mm.
When the doctor entered the room, Shu was, by all accounts, a mess. He refused to leave his wife's side and cradled her head throughout the doctor's examination. A lot of articles state that the doctor had said Zona died of everlasting faint.
Yeah. Everlasting faint, which is like.
And pregnancy. So just being a woman.
Well, everlasting faint's what they used to call heart attacks.
Heart attacks,
or heart
yes.
failure. It was like a very
Yes.
catch-all, like everlasting faint.
Everlasting faint. Yeah, that's 1890s for a heart attack.
Yeah.
Especially for a woman.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
it was much more delicate to call it an
Yeah.
everlasting faint. Another account, and the one that seems more likely to me, is that the doctor, who only did a cursory examination due to Shu's distress, he didn't want to upset the poor man more. He decided that Zona had fainted at the top of the stairs and had fallen down them. There was blood found near her body, and it was later assumed she had been pregnant at the time of her death. If she knew she was pregnant, though, she had told no one. On January 30th, so a week or so later,
Yeah.
Knapp wrote on the death record that she had died of childbirth.
Which is fucking make up your
It's
mind now.
weird.
Make up your mind.
Yeah.
Was it everlasting faint? Was it
childbirth, which did she have a heart attack and then have a baby that no one knew about? Like, what happened?
Yeah, and where'd the child go?
It
Yeah.
seemed like the idea was that she had fallen down the stairs somehow.
Right.
Zona's body was taken 14 miles across the valley to her childhood home on Little Sewell Mountain and buried 3 days later. Some accounts say she was buried the day after she died, but considering she had a wake, that's not likely.
Mm.
And really quickly, a lot of people wonder about her little boy, infant Heaster.
Yeah.
What happened to him? And the fact of the matter is, nobody fucking knows.
Really?
There is no trace of the boy or his father after Zona gave birth. If the boy died in infancy, which wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world, he probably would have been buried in an unmarked grave.
Yeah.
If he was still alive when she died, he most likely was raised by relatives. But people have searched the censuses and family trees, and so far it seems no one can find what happened to him.
Wow.
There is no mention of him in her obituary either.
When he was out
Or
there
anywhere
somewhere.
else,
I mean,
yeah.
because, and my mother will tell you from having done genealogical research, there's some people just slip through the cracks
Yes.
entirely, especially in places like Appalachia and in that area. Like, it was very easy to disappear. Because also, bear in mind, the census is only ever done like once a decade or more.
Right. And
And-
the 1921 census was burnt and, that
Yeah.
lost to fire.
Yeah, and so and this is, I mean, it's still the case where like census takers have to go to people's homes and interview them, and so
And in
like
the country,
the
houses
country.
would get missed. And so, yeah, there's a lot of,
so it's easy to
Yeah.
disappear. It's easy to not be on record, especially in that time, depending on where
Mm-hmm.
you are. And he may have been raised by people who gave him their name and who just never
right.
told him because they didn't
Because
want
it's
to. They didn't
drama,
want him
yeah.
to be involved in all that or know that. I mean, because it was a thing. I could see, especially even now. I think parents or foster parents, whatever, would not want their child to know that their parents had been murdered.
Right.
Because they just don't. I mean,
Yeah,
I could see
right.
them just like, no, he doesn't need to know that. Just we'll let him know that his mother died of a heart attack
Right.
or something like
Or,
that.
I mean,
but,
at a heart attack at 24.
yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's young to have a heart attack. So, it could, you never know. You
It
never
is.
know. And especially knowing the rest of the story. I tend to believe he probably died fairly soon after birth.
Yeah.
Because he's listed as infant Heaster. He wasn't given a name. And that seems odd to me.
Maybe that is possible, but it's also possible that that he was just given away to another family, and so they never gave him a name because they're like, well, it's never going to be your kid, so just
Right.
don't, like, maybe to help
Yeah, maybe.
to help her let go of the child. They maybe, I mean, who
Who
knows?
knows? There's no telling.
And
There's no
maybe
telling.
the child was stillborn. Maybe he was
Yeah,
born.
exactly.
I mean, who knows?
And yeah,
Um,
well, back then too, there's.
Yeah.
So anyway, speaking of the obituary, I found hers in the Greenbriar Independent newspaper that ran on January 28th, 1897. Mrs. E.Z. Shue, wife of E.S. Shue, died at her home in the Richlands, this county, on Sunday last, the 24th, aged 22 years. So they have her listed
Man, they just
younger.
fucking everything up.
Yeah. Mrs. Shue was a daughter of Mr. Hedges Heaster of Meadow Bluff District. Mr. Shue formerly lived in Pocahontas County. That's it.
That's all they say.
So
No-
this young woman dies suddenly, and that's all that the paper says. And then again, there's no mention of a son, no mention of her being missed. It's very bland considering some of the other obituaries released the same day in the same paper. For example, Mrs. Lynch, wife of Mr. Lewis Lynch, died of consumption at her home near Lowry's Mill, this county, on the 20th, aged about 40 years. She leaves a husband and 8 children from 1 to 13 years old. None but those who have passed through the Yale can realize the sad bereavement. Most of the obituaries have that kind of feel.
Yeah.
There's
And
something.
hers is like, hey, this woman died and her husband
Yeah.
lives here.
Yeah, they were a beloved member of the community. They will be missed. Something that makes their obituary personal. On a side note, this was my personal favorite because these old obituaries give so much detail sometimes.
Oh, they're
Unlike
practically
now.
gossip columns.
So here's one that I couldn't not share.
Oh, please.
W.M. Davis, son of A.L. Davis of Hinton, was run over by a train and killed on the 17th near Hinton. He was very drunk and sat down on the track. 2 women who were with him attempted to pull him off when they saw the train coming, but were unable to do so. And that's his obituary.
He survived by everyone on that fucking train
Yeah.
and the 2 women.
Right. He was very drunk.
The local saloon keeper says he will be sorely missed.
Right.
Like
And
that.
so it's a lot. They usually gave a lot of information at the time. And I mean, to be
Because
honest,
for like little papers like that, and I grew up in a small town as do you,
yes.
so little papers, man, they do everything to like dramatize anything that happens
Mhm.
because there's not a fucking lot to write about. So if
Right.
someone's died, it's like, I mean, and my mother will tell you, as my grandmother before her, the first place they go in the newspaper, if there's nothing on the front page, is the obituaries. Like
Right.
who died?
Yes.
Who died and
Yes.
how?
Yeah.
And there's and the language has had to change and get a little more
Mhm.
conservative over the years because there's fear of people of lawsuits from insensitivity or
Mhm.
whatever. But back in the day, they'd be like, yeah, let's just, people want to know.
Tell 'em.
Obituaries were mainly there to just let people know, like, this person died, y'all. Let me tell you.
Right. And
How.
when you know that she was well loved in the community, they liked
She was
her.
loved by everybody. And she
Yeah.
had a history. Like there'd already been drama in her life.
Right.
Because of this mysterious child.
Right.
With this mysterious guy that
And
just
even
fell off the
if
face of the
everybody
earth. And
didn't
so
know that, they still knew who she was. And you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
But
So
they would have known that. In a small
yeah.
town like that, they would
Yeah,
have known
it's
that.
true.
So the fact that
They wouldn't have
weren't,
necessarily put it in the newspaper,
they might
but
have.
something, that she'll be missed or something. It was sudden.
I can't imagine that some reporter wouldn't have like dug into that story and been like, she survived by, we think, a child that we
Right.
know she had, and somebody. I mean, and if she died mysteriously, why would they be like, well, why is no one asking questions about, well, what happened to her first?
Or died
The first
suddenly.
man, or died
Even
suddenly.
some of them will
It's
say
just
that.
weird that they left it alone.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
weird that they left it alone. That there was no one there.
Is
being
it something that he wrote for them to say, or you know what I mean? It's very strange, especially considering she was so young. There's another couple of them that are kind of bland in the same way as hers, but they were older and seemed to have died by themselves, and so they were probably
there's not a lot of
not a
drama
lot
to
of
it.
drama,
Yeah.
or maybe just not a lot of people around them. Maybe they were isolated. They didn't know, they were.
Yeah,
They
there just
were
wasn't that much information to be had. Maybe.
right. So
Hold
you
the
would think
thought.
it would. I just think it would be bigger news. It's more devastating than that.
It
And
does seem odd.
one of the other minimal, because here's the thing: when we go into these rabbit holes of history, especially when you're looking at an old newspaper, you'll see something and go. "Brrr." So for me in this story, there are two family names: Heister, which can be tracked back to Hester, which is a family name,
Right.
and
Right.
Shoe, which is a spelled different version of shoe. And I found out that those spellings are from different, like one's German, one's more Celtic. So, okay, great. That's not the same name, but Heister is definitely part of Hester, which was very strange. So there's that. And
Yeah.
then the other thing, when I was looking at this paper on the same page, there was somebody talking about doing helping raise money to help one of the cemeteries in town get cleaned up. And the name of that cemetery is the same name as the funeral home that took care of my grandparents and my father's funerals. So it was just very strange.
Weird
and that's
connections.
the Hester side. So
Yeah.
it was just very, very
And there may be a
coincidental.
connection there.
It was coincidental. And I was like, it just made me feel like I should be doing this story.
Zona wants her story told.
That's right. That's right. But
because God knows the obituary fucked it up.
That's right. This obituary, though, is also something that struck me and made me go, tilt my head like our dogs do. Mrs. Livesay, wife of David Livesay, formerly of Greenbriar, died in the hospital at Weston, of which institution she had been an inmate for many years. Her remains were brought to Greenbriar and were laid to rest in the Livesay burying ground. So the hospital at Weston, and she was an inmate there,
for years,
caught my attention. Hospital at Weston, also known as the Weston State Hospital, as well as the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane.
The booby hats.
Yeah. First of all, the fact that she was even mentioned in the paper is a huge deal because that's where they sent people to forget about them.
Disappear. Yeah, that's where they vanished.
Yes. Now, obviously, I dove down and I went fast. I went deep and I went hard. I mean, it's an 1800s mental asylum. What am I going to do? Not be like, well, let's just look at that a little bit.
Let's just take a quick detour
I wasn't
here.
Not just
and
look
this is
at
just
it.
Some random person whose obituary was in the paper the same day as.
Yes,
as
I was looking
Zona's.
through all of the obituaries because I couldn't help myself. So here are a few fun facts. Just since we visited a little bit, there's just a few fun facts about Weston State Hospital. It was built in 1859 as an insane asylum and was also West Virginia's very first public building. It actually stayed a mental hospital until it was closed in 1994.
Damn.
Yes. And it started to kind of lose its, vigor in the 80s when they were like, maybe we should stop treating people like this. And
Yeah,
so,
through like what was it, Geraldo, that came out with his expose of
right. One of
which
them.
sanatorium was it? I think it was in Jersey,
Yeah, something like
and it
that.
was just fucking awful. It was
Right.
just awful,
Right.
awful.
And so they, the times had they were a changing. And so it closed in 1994. And after that, pretty much sat vacant. Sometimes they would look like rent it out to places for parties or conventions or whatever. It was real weird. But in
Why?
I know. I know.
Who does that? Well,
Yeah. In 1999, all 4 floors of the interior of the building were damaged by a massive paintball game between several city and county police officers.
I love this weird little
I know.
sideways story.
How do I not share that shit? That's amazing. 3 of those police officers, by the way, were dismissed for the paintball game that they had.
That literally brought down the building.
It didn't bring it down. It's still there.
It's still there. Okay. But it damaged it, right?
It damaged all the interiors, paintballs. They were shooting each other with paintballs inside this public building. Like, what? It was abandoned, but still, what the fuck were they thinking? So
that's almost like if they just given the inmates paintball guns back in the day.
And it was in 1999. Paintball was everything. Right?
Oh my God, yes. People took that fucking hobby so goddamn seriously.
Yeah. So the building is 242,000 square feet.
Okay.
Huge. And it was purchased in 2007. And the owners are now offering tours 7 days a week, including haunted tours on Friday nights and overnight stays on Saturdays.
If you listen closely on this particular night of the year, you can hear the death of those 3 policemen's careers.
By paintball. Why did you get fired? Was it something? Did you break a law? No, we had a paintball game.
My gun went off. It was an accident. What gun? Well, my paintball gun.
Stage an epic paintball.
I mean, that seems excessive. Fire them over that.
I bet it was fun as hell, though.
Had it done it?
Yeah.
Especially back then, because again, paintball's all the rage.
So that's that little detour.
Thank you for taking that. Mm-hmm. So I just want to recap. our friend Zona, who's possibly relative, died under very mysterious circumstances. And her obituary is not half as ornate as one involving a woman who died in a mental institution that survived as a mental institution for over a century until it was damaged. Until it was closed down in 94, and then damaged by a paintball fight between policemen in 99.
And then bought in 2007, and now you can go on a haunted tour. Okay, so back to Zona.
It's an exciting time to be alive.
Right. So back to Zona, or rather back to her mother, Mary Jane Heaster. Mary became convinced that her son-in-law had murdered her daughter. I think we're all already convinced of that. He was acting weird.
Doesn't every mother think that?
Right. Right. And if she didn't like him anyway.
Son-in-law. She didn't like them getting married anyway, right?
No. It seems that that's the general consensus. After the wake, she removed the sheet from inside the coffin, which we'll get to in a second, and tried to return it to him. But he didn't want it. She noticed an odd odor about it, so she took it home and washed it. According to Mary, when she dropped the sheet into the basin, the water turned red. The sheet then turned pink and the water cleared. After that, the stain could not be removed, which Mary interpreted as a sign that Zona had been murdered. Ooh. She began to pray every night for Zona to return to her and explain what had happened. After 4 weeks, Mary's prayers were answered. For 4 nights in a row, Zona appeared to Mary. And from what Mary said, she told neighbors, she told other people that Zona was appearing to her. She appeared as flesh and blood, not a ghost. Not the idea of a ghost. Right. It was just she was there standing next to her bed. And Zona told her mother that she had been very abusive and cruel to her. The night she died, he had attacked her in a fit of rage because he thought she didn't cook meat for dinner. He had savagely broken her neck and thrown her down the stairs. Oh. As she left her mother's bedside, Zona demonstrated the damage to her neck by rotating her head in a complete circle. Mary,
It just makes me think of an owl.
yeah, right. So after those 4 nights in a row, Mary and her brother-in-law, Johnson Heister, went to Lewisburg prosecutor John A. Preston, who first disbelieved the story. However, after several hours of questioning, Preston became convinced that there was a basis for an investigation. We don't know whether or not he was reacting to the ghost story or he was to the rumblings about town that Zona had been murdered, but he did dispatch several deputies to re-interview several people of interest to the case.
Well, and all I had to do was interview the coroner and be like, you didn't fucking do
Right.
basic fucking, you had one job.
One job.
One job.
One
and you
job.
put childbirth as
But
the
she
cause of
was a
death.
woman.
God,
I remember in college, anytime you were sick and you went to Goddard, it was like a joke. If you were a woman, you had to go in and be like, I'm not pregnant, because no matter what, if you had a cold, are you pregnant? That was it's like what they said every single time. You sure you're not pregnant? It was like you were shamed for possibly being pregnant just for going in.
It's like, Jesus.
It's like, fucking get off my nuts.
Way to incentivize
people.
Me to take care of my health by doing regular doctor visits.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
So it was, I mean, I think I even went to the dentist and they were like, are you pregnant? So here's what they found out.
Okay.
Neighbors said that Shu had behaved rather strangely during the wake. His grief changed from overwhelming sadness to this incredible energy. He never left the side of the coffin and would not let anyone get too close to the body. The sheet that Mary had taken from that coffin, Shu had rolled it up and placed it on the side of Zona's head and put a pillow on the other side. According to him, it was to help her rest easier. When they moved the coffin to the cemetery after the wake, though, some noticed a strange looseness to her head. A bruise on her right cheek had also been seen. Preston, the prosecutor, interviewed Dr. Knapp himself, and Knapp admitted that his examination had been incomplete, but that he had seen bruises on her neck. They also found out that Shu had been looking for a new life for a very good reason. Turns out he had been married at least twice before he married Zona.
Oh, shit.
In 1885, he married Ellen Cutlip, and in 1887, they had a daughter, Gerta Lucretia. Shu reportedly beat his wife so badly that a group of vigilantes dragged him out of bed one winter night and threw him through the ice in the Greenbriar River. It is unclear whether this incident occurred before or after the birth of their daughter, but the marriage ended in divorce 4 years later, while Shu was in the state pen serving time for horse stealing.
Wow, all the connections.
I know.
I had no idea. I didn't know this. These details are completely new to me.
Yeah. So the divorce, on the divorce decree, cruelty was cited as the reason.
Oof.
Yeah.
And this was back then. So, I mean, where the definition of cruelty, as defined by men,
right,
as pertaining to the treatment of women, was pretty fucking not exactly enlightened, shall we say.
And so then to realize, you know, especially with H.H. Holmes couldn't get the divorce agreed to.
Yeah.
This one was. Yeah. So,
Oof.
right.
God,
in June of 1894, Shu married again, this time to Lucy Ann Tritt from nearby Alderson. They lived with his parents on Droop Mountain near Hillsborough, where Lucy died less than 8 months later. There was no investigation, and the Pocahontas Times stated only that she died suddenly. After Zona's death, though, multiple stories regarding Lucy's death began circulating. The most common one was that she had died when a brick fell on her head.
Whoa!
The assumption was that Shu was holding the brick while it fell. Quote, fell.
Okay, well, I want to just point out to our listeners that we did not know these details.
No.
We didn't know these details would be cross-related. In our stories, I have no idea.
No idea.
That's crazy.
Yeah. No matter the version of the story told, most of Shu's neighbors did believe he had killed Lucy. He may have even been married a third or fourth time.
God,
records aren't very clear, and names being changed from nicknames to given names make it more confusing. He was definitely married twice, though, and apparently he had at some point said he had a goal of marrying 7 times. Zona could have possibly been his 5th wife.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. After all this information came out, Preston decided, there's evidence. We probably
We
ought
have
to
a case
get
here.
an official autopsy on
We
her.
should dig her up.
So Zona's body was exhumed on February 22nd, 1897 in the local one-room schoolhouse. So it's about a month after she died.
Yeah.
Shue had, of course, vigorously complained about this turn of events, but he was required by law to be present for the autopsy. 3 physicians participated in the autopsy that lasted 3 days.
Wow.
I know. As is common practice in an autopsy, they examined Zona's stomach for poison and checked other vital organs of the chest and abdomen.
And he had to be there for all that? What a weird law.
Yeah. Now, some things say 3 physicians, some say 3 days. I said 3 physicians for 3 days. It could be one or the other, and people are just getting those confused.
Or it could be 3 days with 3 different
3
physicians.
days,
Like one physician comes in
per day to get 3 different
I can
opinions.
see, yeah, 3 different. Yeah, that could
Or it could be 1 physician 3 days, or 3 physicians 1 day.
I'm just still wigging out the fact that he had to be there for it.
Yes,
Like, you gotta watch.
I had to double check that, but yeah, he was there.
You gotta watch, man.
Here's how we know. So, as is common practice in autopsy, they examined I just said that, with the vital organs, chest and abdomen. Working around the head and neck, the doctors began to whisper. One of the doctors turned to Shue and said, "Well, Shue, we have found your wife's neck to have been broken." Now, of course, if she had just fallen down the stairs, fainted and fallen down the stairs, that would make sense. But the Pocahontas Times reported that on the throat were the marks of fingers, indicating that she had been choken, that the neck was dislocated between the first and second vertebra. The ligaments were torn and ruptured. The windpipe had been crushed at a point in front of the neck. Shue was charged with murder and jailed in Lewisburg to await trial. While he was in jail, he said, "They will not be able to prove I did it." Which is different than "I did not do it."
Yeah, rather different.
Yeah. He must have started to doubt his claim because by May 20th, he had threatened to kill himself. So.
I love how that's like, don't you dare like execute me or I'll kill myself. That's what it boils down to.
Right. The trial began on June 22nd, 1897 and lasted 8 days. Mary Jane Heaster was Preston's star witness. He confined his questioning to the known facts of the case and did not bring up her visions of her daughter.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I love this. I love this detail.
Perhaps hoping to prove her unreliable, Shue's lawyer questioned Mrs. Heaster extensively about Zona's visits to her on cross-examination. But the tactic backfired when Mrs. Heaster would not waver in her account despite intense badgering. As the defense had introduced the issue, the judge found it difficult to instruct the jury to disregard the story of the ghost, and many people in the community seemed to believe it. It didn't help that when Shue took the stand for himself on the 6th day, he rambled on all afternoon, but didn't do much more than deny everything that had been said against him. And at one point, he appealed to the jury to look into his face and then say if he was guilty. This made, according to the Greenbriar Independent account, an unfavorable impression. After 1 hour and 10 minutes of deliberation,
looking at the jury going, "Put him up, put him up. I'll fight you with one hand."
Right. Tell me I did it, motherfucker.
Tell me I did it. You saw what I did to my wife. I'll do. I mean, fuck.
I fucking dare you to tell me I did it. Okay, so
if you find me guilty, I'll throw you down the goddamn stairs. Shit. You do know
say I'm guilty, I'll crush your windpipe. So after 1 hour and 10 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. The accounts in the Greenbriar Independent make clear...
and 1 hour and 15 of that was just lunch.
Right, yeah. So in the paper, it made clear that Shue was convicted of murder on his third wife of circumstantial evidence, not because of a ghost testimony. He was sentenced to life in state prison. Following a foiled lynching attempt a few days later, and a couple of people were sent to prison over trying to lynch him, he was taken by train to the state prison in Moundsville. Life in prison was not very long because Shue died of natural causes 3 years later on the 1st of March, 1900.
Did he die of childbirth?
Possibly. Everlasting faint.
Everlasting faint.
So there's a very common photo of Zona that you find when you search her name. I'm going to put that on the Instagram. Surely I'll remember. It's this one. If you know this one. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this picture is her hair is very flat.
Yeah.
And there's the scarf. You can see this.
Is this
That's the
picture,
scarf.
is this,
It's most likely a postmortem picture.
oh man,
So she is wearing the scarf.
that he dressed her
tied
up with.
and it's very tight.
It is very
It's
tight.
just a very her hair, her face, and her neck are very weird looking. Her face is very flat, so she's probably.
I hate to say it kind of looks like if you've, let's say you broke one of your mom's favorite statues and you had to glue the head back on.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah,
like,
it's a little off.
Right. Something's off.
Yeah. So I'll put that on there too. But
ugh, that's creepy.
Those postmortem pictures are fascinating.
They really are. It was
really
common practice to do it because getting
time,
a picture was it was quite an expense and it took time.
Right.
But that's why you can often tell if you look at older pictures, you'll know the exposure time was so long that it's why most living people look very glassy-eyed.
Yes.
Because they have to stand still for so long for the exposure that their eyes almost always move. But if this is a trick, kids, if you're looking at old photographs, like prior to say 1910, if the person's eyes are perfectly clear and staring right at the camera or staring wherever, and they're so clear, odds are that person's dead.
Yeah, the stillest person is so anyway, I thought that was fascinating too, that's the scarf that she was wearing when they took that postmortem picture.
Well, it was not detailed too to have Shu dress her body for the funeral because that was not usually done by men. It was usually done by female relatives or by professionals that would come in, but usually members of the community, but almost always women. Or if it was a guy, it might be men that dressed the body down. But generally, a woman was not dressed for burial by her husband unless they lived alone on a farm somewhere in a mountain.
Right.
There was no one else to do it. But so that was kind of weird. And that raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah. Zona is now buried in Meadow Bluff, Greenbriar County, West Virginia, at the Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery. Her grave was unmarked for more than 80 years, so that's why that discrepancy with the birth year can come into place. So the location can't be guaranteed, but she's most likely buried in her family's plot, somewhere around where her tombstone is. Yeah. A state highway mile marker a few miles west of Lewisburg, not too far away from the cemetery, reads, Greenbriar Ghost. Interred in a nearby cemetery is Zona Heaster Shue. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband, Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified this apparition's account. Edward, convicted of murder, was sentenced to the state prison, only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. Of course, we know the circumstantial evidence is what convicted Shue, but it is highly likely that evidence would not have been discovered had Zona not appeared to her mother. Maybe Mary came up with the story of her daughter's ghost to help draw attention to Zona's murder. Maybe
there's that possibility.
Yeah, maybe Zona really did appear. I tend to believe Mary's account because, number one, we host a podcast about ghosts, and two, Mary lived until 1916, and she never once recounted her story. She always said that her daughter had appeared to her.
Yeah, I thought about that too when I looked into it back in the day. I was like, yeah, I could see them going like, how do we get the law involved? Because we need to dig her up and we need to get public interest. I could see them making up the story, but there's so many odd details about it. Like why 4 nights in a row? Why things like that? There's details that don't seem to add anything to the story.
Right.
And why wait so long?
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, that's something, it just seems weird. And I don't think it was made up because ultimately it's not what was needed.
Right.
I think if the family would have talked, I mean, they could have been.
It just got the
because the lawyer, the prosecuting attorney was interested, but he heard the story, but he didn't believe it. But he was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but everything else, this coroner report, everything else, there's something there. So they didn't really need it to be a ghost story. If they just came to him with what they already had, he would have looked into it.
Probably.
So it doesn't seem.
It's like the ghost story empowered her to do something because Zona was saying, do something about it.
Yeah.
And so.
So I tend to believe. I tend to believe her as well.
When I told Jack about the story, he sent me this Appalachian song he had seen in a book called Rage Across Appalachia, which is a supplement to Werewolf of the Apocalypse.
Oh,
Hashtag nerd alert.
I remember by White Wolf Games. I used to play
Yeah,
that.
right.
I used to play that game back in the day.
Yeah. So those who don't know, Jack is an Appalachian fella, and he said this song can be found in a lot of places, but it seemed to apply here. So I'm just going to read this.
Ooh.
It's an old Appalachian song. Don't sing love songs, you'll wake my mother. She's sleeping here right by my side, and in her right hand a silver dagger. She says that I cannot be your bride. All men are false, says my mother. They'll tell you wicked love and lies. The very next evening, they'll court another, leave you alone to pine and sigh. My daddy is a handsome devil. He's got a chain 5 miles long, and on every link a heart does dangle of another maid he's loved and wronged. Go court another tender maiden and hope that she will be your wife, for I've been warned and I've decided to sleep alone all of my life.
Ooh, I like it. You go, girl.
I was like, thanks, Jack. I'm definitely reading that.
You don't need no man.
For sure. And so that is the story of the Greenbriar ghost.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's so much more in depth.
Yeah.
Well done.
There was so much too when you once you get in, it's like,
and
oh,
I do like the idea that there's a relationship there, that you're related.
Yeah, somewhere along the lines.
Somewhere.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. God. Yeah. But
that's great. I want to do more stories about like, because there I know there are other stories out there about like murderers being brought to justice,
right?
From
their
paranormal
ghosts or
means.
haunted by them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was so good. It was so good.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was great. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. So this morning we went and had brunch while watching Scary Stories.
Yeah.
To read in the dark.
Scary Stories to tell in the dark.
To tell in the dark, yeah. We went to see that this morning.
It was fun.
Super fun.
It was super fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I don't think it's for children.
Oh yeah, I'd let my kids see it.
I would not.
I would let my kids see it. My kids would probably grow up to be really twisted, but
yeah,
I'd let them see it.
The imagery is terrifying. I mean, if we let the girls see it, they would have nightmares forever.
Yeah.
Some of it's really scary for a kid.
So it's an intense movie. It's
definitely scarier than Goosebumps, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it does have some the jump scares weren't as crazy as I thought they would be. They didn't have as many of them.
Yeah. And they were well done.
There's some really good suspenseful moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The use of sound is really good.
Mm-hmm.
Their use of quiet.
Yeah.
Was effective.
It was good.
And I loved how they brought a lot of the classic images from those fucking
terrifying
and unforgettable illustrations.
Yes.
Like they really did a good job of bringing them to life. Like Harold and the weird woman thing and
the skeleton toe lady. Oh my God.
Oh.
So good.
She was
and the
Tighty Doty Walker or whatever it was called.
Fuck. They're all just fucking creepy. So but that's what we did this morning. It was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Anything else?
I can't think of it. Yeah, I'm I'm
That's good. All right, that's good.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I will say one side note. When I was looking into H.H. Holmes, for some reason I went down a rabbit hole and found I was looking at ways that story, that legend, both the true parts and maybe then the questionable parts have inspired pop culture. And have you ever heard of a movie called Nothing But Trouble?
I think so.
It's Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Demi Moore, and John Candy. Came out in 1990, 91, I think. And I had not thought about that movie in years, but I obsessed over it as a kid. I had to go review it for the paper that I read, the school paper.
Oh yeah.
And I loved it. My dad couldn't drive a car yet, so my dad had to drive me to see it. So we watched it together. But the only ones in the theater. I loved it. The movie tanked. My dad hated it, and he was really mad that I was going to give it a good review. And he was like, "You can't get that's a horror movie." It was weird. It was so. I'd never seen a movie a mainstream movie be that fucking weird because it's just weird. Every frame is how, what, who approved this? Mm-hmm. And it's not I don't know how to describe it, but it's at least in part inspired by the Murder Castle because it's about a crazy ass yokel judge that kills traffic violators, just for the hell of it. Because he's like, yeah, what the hell? So they have to come to his house, which is also the courthouse, which is also a junkyard, which is also whatever. And if he doesn't like you, I'm like, okay, well, thank you for the crime of running that stop sign. We're gonna execution. And so, and then hits a button and they go down a trap door or something and they die. So it's I was watching that going, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that movie in years. So if anyone has seen the movie Nothing But Trouble, I would love to hear your take on it because it is the most polarizing movie I think I've ever seen. Because
Yeah.
I've seen it a dozen times. I obsessed over it as a kid because I was like, why does no one else love this movie? This is a fucking great, weird
Have you watched it
fucking
recently?
movie. Yes, and I
Okay.
still love it.
Okay.
It's not funny. It's not funny. I
It's
don't
just
know.
weird.
It's just it's creative. I think it just the creative it is like Dan Aykroyd just was like, let's just see what we can do. And he was so well liked. And
Yeah.
apparently I did a little research on it, and apparently everyone fucking loved working with him as director.
Right.
And he also plays two characters in the film. And everyone loved him. They were like, this is oh my God, we had such a ball working on this fucking weird ass movie. And that, was at least partially inspired by the Murder Castle. Probably. It's never confirmed. Dan Aykroyd has never come out and said that it was
I would not be
inspired.
surprised.
But I mean, there has to be.
He's
Because
weird
even
like
the
us.
building kind of looks like, what I imagine the Murder Castle looked like.
Right.
And anyway, that was just the kind of detour I went on. I was like, oh, but I want to hear people's take on that. I watched it with several people, and one person was like, that's fucking cool. That's fucking crazy. I don't know what I just watched. I loved it. And the other person was like, I'm angry at you for showing me that movie. Like, that's, I can't even laugh at how bad it is. Like, and it was so just two completely, and so I'm just really fascinated. Like, does that movie only work on some people?
I don't know.
And am I one of them?
Possible.
I don't know.
Well, I'm glad that you liked it. At least.
It's just weird. I
haven't seen
suggest
it.
you
Maybe
watch
I'll
it.
see it. Yeah.
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 Chevy Chase is awful in it though, because I hate Chevy Chase.
Yeah, it seems that's-
I've never liked him very much. I
He's
think
got a great birthday though.
Does he? Oh, he does. He's
We
such
share
an asshole to people though.
I know.
He's such an asshole.
I share a birthday with him and Jesse Jackson and
Much prefer Jesse Jackson.
Sigourney Weaver.
Much prefer Sigourney
Yeah,
Weaver.
she's the one I normally
She's
say.
the awesome.
She's the awesome one. Yeah. She's such a badass.
That's maybe that explains Chevy Chase's life and why he's such an asshole. Like, man, I have to be compared to those people. Of course, I'm going to be the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
But yeah, by all accounts, Chevy Chase is just impossible to work with and a dick. And like when he was on the set of this film, like he was getting paid 3 times more than Aykroyd, who was the director, writer, and playing 2 roles in the film.
Right.
And he held that over his head all the time. Like, yeah, I'm getting paid like 3 times, and he would show up late and just like not want to do it. Like, he's such an asshole. I'm like, what? And everyone else, this is a movie that everyone else was having a fucking ball on because they were like, I want to do this weird thing in this one scene where like, we have these weird like sets here, and Aykroyd like, oh, okay, we got it, because Warner Brothers loved, and they're like, here, have 40 million.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I want Warner Brothers to love me.
I did.
If
Yeah.
they gave me $40 million, though, I would probably not make a movie with it.
Well, not with all of it.
Not with all of it. I would do a very low budget movie.
You can make a movie for like $2 million and then just keep the rest.
So much of it.
Anyway, so that
but
was.
we can dream about that later.
Yeah. One day.
Yeah. So I guess until Thursday when we have our next Ghosticles episode, I thank you guys for listening. And remember, it's okay to sleep with the lights on.